We're here today to talk about the data management and sharing plans that are a new requirement from the NIH for these upcoming grant cycles. So let me share my PowerPoint out. If you hold on a minute while I do that. Okay, can people see my slide?
Not yet.
What do you see, Ashley? Anything at all?
Nothing. Yeah.
Let me try this one more time. All right.
All right. I see your desktop.
There.
There we go.
Okay, sorry about the technical difficulties. Every day is like a new challenge technology-wise. Okay, let's get going right into the slides. All right. So the new policy for data management and sharing is effective a week from now, basically, well, a week from yesterday. So January 25th of 2023, it replaces the existing 2003 data sharing policy. There's been iterations in between. This policy is a long time coming. There was a draft put out, comments in the draft. There were different milestones along the way. But now here we are with the implementation date. So this policy attempts to foster a climate of data stewardship. So this is in some professions or in some areas of science, this is more commonplace than in others. I don't think it is quite so common in biomedical fields, although genomics definitely has had a culture of sharing for quite a while. So this policy requires that anyone who's receiving NIH funding and creating data, scientific data, is required to submit a data management and sharing plan with their grant application. So this is the proactive plan and prospectively planned. And then the other part of this policy is the policy requires compliance with the approved plan. So you submit the plan, it gets like a pass or fail kind of a treatment. So it's either approved or not approved. If it's not approved, it can be revised in the just-in-time process. So, but it comes with some teeth in respect to, they're saying this, if you don't comply with these plans, that it could affect future funding decisions at the PI level and at the institutional level, because the institution is ultimately the one who kind of signs off as the steward of this money. So, or the receiver, I should say, of the money. And then wanted to point out here on this slide, after we had initially put the slide deck together on December 22nd, there was a new kind of batch of frequently asked questions that came out. Some of the stuff in this policy is like has a discretionary element, and so people were asking questions, does this apply, and what do we do in these circumstances? So these are their responses, and they're very good, and there's quite a few questions and answers in there. So I think when you're going through trying to write these, this would be a good tool for you to look at either before you get started, or if you're having problems in any one area. They are separated by different areas or different elements of the plan. All right, so the expectations of this policy, the expectation is that data sharing will be maximized. They do allow for certain limitations that they feel are justifiable, and you'll have to, in the plan, talk about those limitations that you plan to put on this sharing of your data, and then provide that justification as well. But apart from that, they do expect you to have in your plan how you're going to manage all the data, even if it's not all to be shared. Okay, and then this idea of prospectively planning for all the stages that are yet to come basically means there's a lot of pre-thought required. So if at all possible, don't leave this to the last minute. You need to know what repositories you expect to use, what are their timeframes for holding the data, and different things like this. So it really does take some time for you to think about your data. What do you have? What are you sharing? Where are you going to put it? Different elements. So we'll go through those somewhat now, and then you can kind of dig in yourself later with the specific types of data you have, and move forward. So there's also this expectation that the plan be responsibly implemented. And what this means is this plan isn't like, doesn't supersede other requirements. So you're still required to protect privacy, rights, confidentiality. So this is going to work in tandem with those plans instead of replace them. And then you're also required to abide by existing laws, regulations, and policies. So if there are other policies in place, or you're working with a tribal nation and there's different laws that apply, all of those are applicable as well. So, you know, FERPA, HIPAA, those still apply as well. This doesn't negate any of that. All right, so what the NIH has done is kind of give us 6 different elements that they expect in the plan. And these are the 6 elements you see here. And I'll talk about them a little bit. And but I also want to let you know that MCW has an institutional membership to this DMP tool. And the DMP tool is a great way to set up and to write your DMP plan. So, and Ashley's going to show you this in the second part of this webinar. So just kind of briefly, data type. So they want you to identify the data that's going to be preserved and shared. So what type of data do you have? Let me have a little more, like how many, you know, are you going to do 50 participants? How many subjects do you have in the data? And generally, are they, you know, EEG data? Are they fMRI data? Is it, what kind of data do you have? And so the next section here is the related tools, software, and code. So they're asking you to tell them about what's required to use this data and what have you used to manipulate it. So basically, if somebody else were to use it, what do they need to know? And what software and tools did you use to do it? And also where those tools can be located. It is important, especially in this section, to remind you that URLs and hyperlinks are not allowed in this document. So you need to kind of type out where to go for these tools as opposed to including a link. All right, so the next element is standards. So these are standards to be applied to the scientific data and metadata. So you're probably all aware of the efforts to use common data elements. So the data sets become interoperable with other data sets, but this is where you're going to talk about that. You're going to talk about if you're using data dictionaries, what data identifiers, if you have definitions, any other documentation about the data would be in this. And as much as possible, they do want you using standards. Okay, the next one is data preservation, access, and timelines. So this is where you're going to talk about the plan and the timeline for preserving and access to the data. So this is like, where are you going to deposit the data so that it can be shared? What's the repository? Is there going to be a DOI, like, or some kind of identifier given to this data set? And how long will the data be available? Now, this is one where there isn't a strict guidance, like many of these elements have some area for the PI to use their discretion. So they want you to consider how long the data will be relevant or useful, and maybe how long does your repository allow it to be stored, things like that. So you're going to call those out in this section. All right. And then how often you're going to be depositing your data. Is this something when you or if you're acquiring data over time from a group, are you going to be uploading it every 6 months to some registry? Are you going to be uploading it at the end based on your conclusions? So all of that goes in here. All right, the next section is access, distribution, and reuse considerations. So, if you're going to have any limitations on access, that's where you're going to say them here. So let's say that, sorry, I'm going to try and think of a good example here. That you have a data use agreement, you're going to mention that in here. And then also you'll talk about your consenting, have your participants been consented, and you'll have to think about consenting because that'll need to be included as well. You can't share data that people haven't consented to share. So, so that is this section here. And if you are limiting that access because privacy concerns or any of these other reasons that the NIH considers justifiable, then this is where you'll mention that as well. And then finally, this last section, oversight of data management. They really want to know what's the process for making sure that changes are recorded over the life cycle of the grant. Who's going to be reporting out? Is that going to be at those annual dates? And then, you know, is that going to, well, I should say that should include any changes you made to the plan. Obviously, you can't proactively guess with any certainty, like exactly how things are going to go. So if you need to make adjustments as the grant cycle continues, that's where you're going to put them in here, and then they will be looked at and approved and adjusted. Okay. You may change the repository you have in mind. The data may lead you into a different direction, different things like that. So there is kind of a standard wording that CC has shared. So we're trying to get that into the DMP tool at this stage. So let me go on to the next slide. And so just kind of an overview of how this works. So the plan is submitted with the grant, but it's not formally, you know, inside of the normal grant paperwork. The only thing that's in the grant per se is if you decide you want to include any costs of this sharing in the grant, then you put this as a separate line item in your cost section. And there'll be a chance to do a brief description of that and why there's an expense there and what that expense is for. And they'll determine if that's an allowable expense or not. An example of some non-allowable expenses are for infrastructure. So if there's a cost to, like, let's say, building the infrastructure to store data, that wouldn't be allowable as a grant cost here. But the full plan, the full DMP plan, DMPS plan, is going to be a separate document that will be attached to the grant, and it is a maximum of 2 pages. So you don't want to get too wordy, and just address those 6 elements succinctly, but with enough detail so they know you're complying with the descriptions of the elements that they want to see. Somehow, sorry, lost the current slide. And then in terms of the plan assessment, peer reviewers will only see the part that is actually in the grant, which is this budget line. And even then, they're not really scoring the budget. So that's the only part of the plan they'll see, whatever brief description you have in here for a line item on the budget. NIH program staff will be evaluating the DMP plan separately, so not peer reviewed. And the plans can be revised, like we've talked about, and they can be revised before the grant is awarded. In fact, if the plan isn't approved, the grants won't be awarded. They'll be some communication to you to revise these in the just-in-time session, because they do need to be approved so the grants can be accepted. And then finally, in this compliance column, so compliance is now, incorporated into the terms and conditions of the grant. So when the grant is signed for, compliance is right in there in what is required. And then they do want to monitor the grants at regular intervals. So it will be expected that you'll do this as part of, at a minimum, as part of the annual reporting out that happens. Again, you can change your plan at any time. It's easy to do it at the year cycle. And I would say at a minimum, you should probably review it at these yearly markers. And also, as we mentioned before, compliance could factor into future decisions. We certainly saw that to be the case with the publishing of the manuscripts, that eventually, you were expected to go back and make sure all of those things were published. So, and I think they're trying to address that right at the beginning, because that wasn't universally done in the past, and they had to kind of build teeth in later. So they've kind of learned from that experience to make it part of the process. So, so I think the thing they're looking for is that the 6 elements are adequately addressed and are reasonable. Okay, so and then they'll be accepted, kind of a pass-fail. And then finally, I wanted to point you, we'll share out the slides, but these are supplementary information that has been issued over the course of the last year and a half. The policy came out in its final form, but guidelines for each of these sections has been a little bit slower coming out, so they've come out a little bit piecemeal. But this is, all of these will link to, each link will link to that supplementary information from the NIH. So if you're wondering what costs are allowable, if you follow this link, you'll get to those. And so here's the major supplementary information that has been shared. And then in April, the NIH, the past April, set up a new website for anything related to the data sharing at the NIH. So it's quite useful website, and has some nice like how-tos or overviews that you can walk through. And then also we have a library guide that we've written on the policy as well, and that's here. Both of these include sample plans. I think, how many are we up to now? Actually, like seven. There's like 7 sample plans made available, and you can link to those in both of these places. So finally, I just wanted to let you know, this is the last session of this data management and sharing overview, but we do have 2 sessions of Q&A coming up. So we have a cohort of colleagues that have some experience in these areas that'll be available to answer your question. Matt Richter will be there from the Office of Compliance. Also Matt Flister from the RCC. We'll have Cece Hillard there. She's heading up this ad hoc committee on this policy, so she'll be there. And Ryan Spellacy from the IRB. So we'll have a lot of people there if you have specific questions, and that's going to just be an open discussion there where we can talk about some of the specifics, questions you might have. So does anybody have any questions at this point for me?
Yeah, I have a question. I'm sorry I come late because interview student, and can we find this material or your PPT online?
Ashley, we're recording this one. We didn't think to record the first one, but
okay, great.
Ashley is recording this one, and it'll be she can push it out to everyone here, but also it'll be available on our library guide.
Okay, great.
As will the slides. So anybody else?
There's a couple in chat, Catherine.
Sure, go ahead. I want to just read them. I don't.
Yes, I will read this first one. Is MCW planning to provide resources to help with formatting genomic data to the DBGAP standards, uploading, etc.?
At this point, I haven't heard anything about that. That would be a good question to ask Dr. Hillard tomorrow. But at this point, I haven't heard anything to that effect.
Hey, Captain, this is Basir.
Hi.
Hey, and it may be, nice to kind of understand, how people get access to the data, the other aspect, so if someone is looking to, what is the process like for them when someone, wants to access, someone else's data? What do they have to do? What would we kind of hear from them? That would help me set up a plan for how I would share the data.
Mm-hmm. Well, different depositories have different ways of handling it. So like how you're notified, you can, people, if there's a persistent identifier with the data, then obviously somebody could cite your data and say that they use your data to create their own manuscript. But also, you can reach back to the repositories and find out who's requested your data. Some of them have policies where they notify you. So, and in a way, this, like, we're kind of new to delving into this at the library. And I think this is another good example of something that we need to offer, is some webinars on how to find data and request data to use somebody else's data. And that would inform that other side. But we haven't put together anything in that area. We kind of jumped in mostly with this new policy because we had been tracking it for a while, and it was helpful to the Office of Research that we try and lead some educational webinars about it. So, but it kind of depends where you share it, how it's available.
Because the question would be that, if someone is asking to kind of get access to data, does the repository screen that person, or is there any screening necessary? Or when I, I'm allowing someone to, or if I'm sharing my data with someone, am I to assume that the person has certain credentials? Is it up to me to make sure that it's going into, I don't know, the right hands or whatever?
No, it actually isn't, because that's, well, I shouldn't say that. It may be, and then you'd have to set up some data use agreements, or, talk to the repository about, that's the whole section of that DMPTool is how, you intend to or want to limit access. But most of this policy is saying it just needs to be shared publicly. So I think there is some expectation that you won't limit unless there's a reason to, like they use the term justifiable limits, or justifiable limitations. So if there is you want to limit it to certain areas or people, then you have to be able to justify why it's limited.
And maybe I'm not very, familiar with this, because, I've had one NIH grant and we didn't have, we didn't share our data. And so when you say ongoing data, what does that mean? Ongoing data, is that during the study? You wouldn't be sharing data during the study with anyone, right?
Well, it could be. If people, part of their thing is to collect data and put it in this registry, they might be sharing it in an ongoing fashion where they take 6 months of data and then upload it, and then, upload it. It kind of depends on what your grant is for. But I think we're all new to this, really. This is, we went from having just NIH grants that were $500,000 or more to like any amount. So, and even the NIH is kind of new to this. We saw that the supplementary information come out like very gradually. There's still a lot of things they hope to learn from from plans that are submitted, I could see some of these requirements changing or being tightened up or loosened based on their experience. So I think we'll learn a lot from what gets sent back and ask for revisions in this after they've started reviewing some of our plans. So I think everyone has a lot left to learn.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. And so you're welcome to bring your questions tomorrow. I'm, we know some pieces of it. The NIH is the only one who knows all, and we'll have other people there tomorrow or Monday to weigh in on some of these topics too. But you're welcome also to email us at the library, and we'll dig in and try and find the right person to answer your question as well. So thank you for your patience. And Ashley is going to dig deeper into the DMP tool, and thank you.
Hey, Catherine, there's just one more question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So, does the policy apply to preclinical data, so not involving human studies?
I have to say I'm not as familiar with the grant cycle, so I'm not sure what preclinical data is. But yeah, it's more than just human research. It's all NIH funding. So all scientific data generated. So if it's generated during the grant cycle as a part of what is being funded by your grant, it applies.
Right.
I hope that helps.
Let's see.
Anything else, Ashley?
No, that was it.
All right, well, I'm going to stop sharing and pass it to you. Oh,
Do you see it?
yeah, you're fast.
Okay. All right. So I have up here the DMP tool, and it's very easy to get to, dmptool.org. And you will land on this page. And like Catherine mentioned, MCW does have an institutional partnership with DMP tool. So we are able to log in with our MCW email address. So I did that here, and I will continue. It's just confirming that I'm with the Medical College of Wisconsin. And then here, I just need to log in one more time. So now I'm taken to my dashboard within the DMP tool. If it's your first time logging in, you will be prompted just to fill out some basic information. So your first and last name, some simple information like that. Otherwise, you'll be taken to your dashboard. But I did want to show you all of the features that are available to you right away. So at the top, this navigation pane here, we always have that link back to our dashboard. And then we can create a plan right here. But you can also create the plan by clicking this blue button. So either one. Then we have information about funder requirements. So this is helpful if you just need a little bit more information about what your funder does require. So of course, we're probably looking at this NIH, the DMSP forthcoming 2023. And you can see all of the information here. And you'll note right here that template was updated on the 11th. And then we'll have some sample plans and then a few helpful links available to you right here. And then we have public DMPs. Now, these are data management plans that researchers have already completed and are sharing them with the public. So of course, right now, I checked yesterday, we didn't have any. So we do not have any from the Medical College of Wisconsin yet, but I do know some researchers are already filling out their DMPs. So hopefully we'll see some of those available soon. But you could always look and see what other institutions or other researchers are doing based on the plan that you're writing. So you'll see right here, there's a plan from Washington University in St. Louis that is using that forthcoming 2023 plan. So if you want any kind of frame of reference that is available to you. And then we have a link for help. So any kind of information you might need, helping you get started, any frequently asked questions. However, if those aren't answered here, we do have a link to our email address. So feel free to reach out to us if you ever have any questions. And then I'll show you one other feature before I jump into the plan. Oh, I see a question. Go ahead.
When we do the login at the DMPTool.org site, when it then shows us the SSO for MCW, are we using our one login credentials, or we have to create a login for that?
No, you're one login. Yeah, that should all work seamlessly for you. So up here under my name, I can edit my profile if I need to. This is what you would see if you first log in. So just some basic information, but I wanted to show you right here. So third-party applications. This is where you're going to see a spot where you can connect your ORCID ID. So you'll be able to click that link, create or connect your ORCID ID. I think it takes about 30 seconds if you need to create a new one, but that will be essential if you do want to register your DMP with the DMP tool. So just keep that in mind, that eventually you will have to do this if you want to register your plan. But if I click create plan, I can get started, and I'm just going to create a test. And something I'll point out as well, since I'm creating this for testing purposes, I'm going to click this box right here so that the DMP tool knows that this is just a mock project. So I won't be able to register it at the end. And then I can select my template. So first I'm going to go with my funder, so the NIH, and then click which template I'm interested in. And we're looking for this one, that forthcoming 2023 template. And I'll just click create plan. So here I have jumped into the plan itself. You'll see these tabs at the top. If you have been in here before, within, I think, the last 3 days, these two tabs have switched. So that's just one little change they've made to their interface. But on this project details page, you'll just, you'll have your title already there. You want to include your abstract, select your research domain, and then a little bit about your funder and funding status if you have that information here. But if we move on to the next tab for collaborators, here is where we can add our contributors. So project contributors would be other principal investigators, anyone who's responsible for data management. You'll be able to add them right here with their name, email. You can put their ORCID ID, otherwise they can do that as well. But you might just want to add some DMP collaborators. So these are going to be people who can maybe read, write, help you revise your plan. You can invite collaborators here by email and select what permissions they would have. So do they have admin rights to your plan? Can they edit your plan, or can they just read it? And then we move on to write plan. So this is going to be the longest section of the data management plan, but there is going to be helpful guidance throughout the whole process. So you'll see here, I just opened the data type section. We'll type in our information in this box here. However, on the right, you'll see helpful guidance from the NIH. So a little bit of information about this particular section. And then they've even included some example answers. So this is really great if you are not knowing where to get started. There will be some sample language below each section for you. And I'll show that you'll see that for each individual box. And if you are collaborating, you can always use this comment tab and add comments to share with your collaborators, so that maybe if you have a question or you're not sure about something, feel free to use this section to communicate with each other. And you'll see all 6 of those elements listed here. Then we move on to research outputs. So we'll just click that add research output here, and you'll see this blank, all these blank fields that you'll need to fill out. So you'll want to select something. Is it audio visual material, text files, data sets, anything like that? You'll select that. And then, of course, describe it. And here's where you can always select if there's going to be any sensitive data or not. And then I know we've talked about repositories already. So if you click that add a repository button, this repository search will pop up, and you can select either subject areas, whether it's going to be a generalist repository. Here you can search by keyword. So if you're looking for any kind of gene repositories, you'll see all of those listed here. So you'll select which one you intend to use. And so we will say, well, NIH says that you want to try and select a domain-specific repository first, if possible. And if not, then a generalist repository would work for you. And then we'll see metadata standards. So if we want to add a metadata standard, we will type that in here. And I always show this one. So the Dublin Core Data Standard. So this one is very well known, probably the best known metadata standard out there. It's very basic, easily understood and implemented. So that's always a good choice. And then you'll see some of the other information, so release date, and then licensing information. So you'll want to select a Creative Commons license to go along with this. Now there are quite a few options, of course, but if you click on this link here, you'll be connected directly to the Creative Commons, and you can get information about each type of license so that you know which one you're selecting and you feel well informed about that. And then we would move on to finalizing our plan. So here's where you'd be able to set your plan visibility. Now I talked about those public DMPs earlier. So you can share your data management plan publicly, so with anyone, or maybe you just want to share it with other researchers within our institution. So you would be able to share it with anyone from MCW. And then of course there's private. And then lastly, on this page, you have that registering section. So I talked about that earlier as well. So you can register your plan for a DMP ID with the DMP tool. So you'd be able to do that here as long as you meet all of these specifications. So of course, since I'm doing a testing plan, of course I can't register it because I had that box checked at the very start. And then you will need to add your ORCID ID as well before you can register. And then we have download. So this is where you can specify the format in any kind of font settings. So font size, margins, and download your plan so that you can include it with your grant. So you'll see all of the common formats are available to you, and you just click download and you'd be able to access that. And that was everything I have for the DMP tool so far, but was there anything I went over that you'd like to see again?
Just a quick question. If you check that little box where it's a mock tool, can you release it later on?
Yep, you should be able to. Yep, right here. You'd be able to uncheck that, and then it would be here. However, I have not met the other requirements to do so. But yeah, so you'd be able to undo that and save it.
So I mean, you could present very clear. Question is, what do we require to use this tool to generate data sharing plan before we actually submit a grant?
Yeah, so you would have to, well, and you don't have to work with the DMP tool to write your plan, but you would need to do this before you submit your plan. However, Catherine did mention that just in time, you can go back and revise the plan if needed.
This is what we recommend. You don't have to do this, but we think this has a lot of helpful information up to the right. You can just link out on those links to get more information right in at the point of need, like right when you're filling out that section. And the other advantage of like registering your plan is it will have a permanent identifier number associated with the plan that you can submit with the manuscript. So it kind of like having permanent identifiers helps link everything together. So when you submit the manuscript, you can submit the persistent identifier for the data and the persistent identifier for the plan. It allows all these things to be linked together. It allows for you to easily come back and edit. And so we think it's a good tool. And if there's, we still have to get it set up, but eventually there will be some MCW documentation where you saw there were just 2 tabs to click on. There will also be some specific documentation for MCW that may include some possible boilerplate language. So so it's not required, but I think it's a really good tool, especially if you're not used to writing these plans. And it's great if you have one that's accepted. It will help your colleagues to share it out among your colleagues as well. It's pretty easy at the end to click that you want us to review it. We can look it over quick and give you some suggestions. I'm not saying that guarantees acceptance, but we might be able to give you some places where you might be able to strengthen it. So so yeah, not required, but it's what we recommend as being perhaps the most helpful way to go about it.
Yeah, from what I read, and this data management plan is more required for if a project or grant will acquire a big data set like RNA sequencing and like big data. So if the grant does not generate this big data set, do we still require to have this document?
Yeah, if you're getting any funding whatsoever from the NIH, it required, before it was only required for grants that the sharing of data was only required for grants that were over $500,000, but now it's for any amount and any data whatsoever, any scientific data.
What I meant is if not generate a big data set, is still
Yes.
we need to feel required for deposit somewhere.
Yep, it is. In fact, if the data is small, it could be just deposited with if you have a journal that's publishing it that allows you to submit a small amount of data to them. For them to hold on to. It could be handled that way, but it's any amount of data, scientific data, and any size grant.
Okay, thank you.
It seems that this is catered more towards, like you said, the larger scale things, and particularly clinical samples and trials. As a basic science research, we might do 25 different experiments that generate raw data that will mean nothing to someone else without lots of other information to then back interpret what that raw data means.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons behind submitting some of this things that go with it, and it is required for everything. It's not geared towards that. The fact that we have more guidance on human research is probably just because there's a few more pitfalls in that in terms of sharing and de-identifying and privacy, but it's required for all data.
Additionally, looking at the DMP tool, a lot of the sample sets that are under the public DMPs are all from 2021 and in that time frame. So are any of those to the standard of the current expectation for the new DMP set?
Well, you see on Ashley's slide, right below the first blue bar, it says the plan is based on NIH DMSP forthcoming 2003. So you do want to pick a plan that says it's been input with this general DMSP for the forthcoming 2023. So this means it's been entered in the current required format for the new policy, as opposed to the existing, the one that was kind of in place since 2003. So you will want to make sure if there's older grants in there, a lot of those are going to be with the old policy, because this does not become required until the 25th.
Thanks so much for this. So quick question in terms of the sort of following up on a question about sort of smaller data sets, sort of, quote unquote, normal bench data, things like that. Do you think it would be acceptable in the plan to say that we would seek, archival with the journal if acceptable, and if not acceptable, we would seek alternatives? Is that kind of boilerplate? Does that seem reasonable, or?
I think it could be reasonable, but it's yet to be seen like what language they're willing to accept. So supposedly they're training this NIH program staff to do this, but how they're kind of telling them what they're exactly telling them hasn't been shared, so that's why I think maybe go to that frequently asked questions. But I think that's fine. But I guess I would say if it can't be shared with the publisher, it'd be better if you said, then we will share it in, Dataverse or something like that. Have your second option identified.
And then building on what I'll describe as a certain amount of insecurity around this, do we have the review of this is administrative? Did I understand that correctly? Meaning that this is not factored into the award decision. This is sort of, it's like the animal protocols or the IRB protocols or things like that. Is that correct?
Well, I guess it's not part of the analyzing the grant per se, but it has to be approved. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how good the grant is. You won't get funded for it.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. So I guess with something so big and all encompassing as like any amount of data and any amount of grant, there's bound to be some hiccups, and we're here to try and help you with those. And I think some of those we'll have to put out to a group of us to find out the best thinking. And, that'll on the topic with all the people who have some expertise in MCW, and some of that will be happening during those Q&A sessions. So yeah, but utilize us. We're here. We can tell you the things we know, and we can tell you the things we don't know, and what our best guess is, or what we've heard from the NIH in the webinars about guidance. All right, if anybody else has questions, feel free, either type them into chat or just shout them out. Right, so there's a lot to get your head around. So, if you start with either the NIH link in the webinar or our library guide. If you just go into InfoScope and type library guide, or it's kind of a lib guide, and then DMSP, you should come to our library guide. It's just going to take kind of a lot of digging in, and where you have questions, looking at the specifications from the NIH. All right, well, everyone have a great day, and thanks for joining us, and good luck to you. And we're here. Let us know what you need.
Thanks, everyone.